I recognized early on that doing less was funny and also was less common. I've been given the opportunity to realize, oh, there's more. You don't have to do less.
Among television's brightest names, few burned as sharply or faded as quietly as David Hyde Pierce. For more than a decade, he was everywhere. His dry wit, his anxious energy, that unmistakable voice. Then, almost overnight, he was gone. No more Frasier, no big screen reinvention, no talk show circuit making clever small talk about his next role. Just silence. What could make one of television's most decorated actors, with 4 Emmys and a place in pop culture history, retreat from the world that once celebrated him? Was it exhaustion, disillusionment, or something far deeper? To understand why David Hyde Pierce vanished, we have to rewind to the height of his fame, the years when everyone wanted a piece of him, but few truly understood him. In the early 1990s, Frasier redefined what a sitcom could be. Spun off from the legendary Cheers, it risked comparison to a juggernaut, yet somehow eclipsed it in sophistication. At its center was Kelsey Grammer as the pompous yet lovable Dr. Frasier Crane, returning to his hometown of Seattle to rebuild his life as a radio psychiatrist. The show might have been content to rest on that premise, until Frasier's younger brother entered the frame. The moment Niles Crane stepped onto the screen, something electric happened. His sharp suits, nervous mannerisms, and razor-thin smile suggested a man perpetually holding his breath in polite company. Within minutes, the audience was hooked. The secret weapon was David Hyde Pierce. Pierce had been working steadily but quietly before Frasier. Guest spots, stage work, the kind of career that rarely earns magazine covers. But his audition changed everything. Producers noticed not only his uncanny resemblance to Kelsey Grammer, but his ability to capture the same intellectual vanity and turn it inward, like a mirror reflecting Frasier's flaws back at him. Niles was the brother who would never say he envied Frasier, yet every glance betrayed it. Pierce's performance layered insecurity over brilliance, warmth over brittleness, until the character felt more human than caricature. Viewers adored him. Critics, too. The chemistry between the two brothers anchored the show. Their scenes were like verbal tennis matches, elegant, ridiculous, and irresistibly funny. But what truly set Pierce apart was precision. Every twitch of the hand, every lift of an eyebrow was calculated but never mechanical. He could turn a sniff, a pause, or a half-stammer into a punchline. Behind that polish lay training few sitcom actors possessed. Long before Hollywood noticed him, David Hyde Pierce had been a classically trained stage performer, steeped in the discipline of timing and restraint. At Yale, he studied music and theater, learning how rhythm shapes emotion. When he approached a scene, he did it like a conductor, measuring beats, spacing silences, sculpting sound. That discipline gave Niles Crane a kind of musicality. Every insult was a note, every gesture a chord. Still, the genius of Niles wasn't only in comedy. Over time, Pierce infused the role with unexpected depth. In early seasons, Niles was mostly the butt of jokes. His off-screen wife Maris an endless source of absurd marital gags. Yet Pierce quietly shifted the character's center of gravity. Beneath the fussiness and fear of germs, he revealed vulnerability. A man desperate for connection, but terrified of imperfection. When his long-suppressed feelings for his father's housekeeper, Daphne Moon, finally surfaced, Frasier transformed from clever farce into something closer to tragicomedy. Pierce played longing as if it were a secret illness, contained, denied, and finally confessed. The payoff, when Niles and Daphne at last came together, felt like a collective exhale after years of restraint. Viewers weren't just cheering for romance. They were witnessing redemption. By then, David Hyde Pierce was no longer merely a supporting actor. He had become Frasier's beating heart. Awards followed naturally. 4 Emmys from 11 nominations, a statistic so rare it bordered on mythical. Yet even in the glow of success, Pierce seemed untouched by celebrity's usual hunger. While his co-stars expanded into film, voice work, and constant interviews, Pierce kept a distance. To him, the work mattered more than the spotlight. He would later admit that the attention sometimes unnerved him. The idea of being recognized not for who he was, but for a carefully engineered persona. It was as though Niles's discomfort with chaos wasn't only an act. It was a reflection of the actor himself. As Frasier entered its final years, rumors began circulating that Pierce was ready to move on. The show's tone had matured. Its characters had reached a sense of completion, and perhaps so had he. In 2004, when the series aired its finale, the world expected Pierce to springboard into major film roles. Instead, he retreated. His public appearances dwindled. Occasional theater credits appeared in trade papers, revivals on Broadway, guest directing, charity performances, but nothing like the omnipresence of his sitcom days. For fans, it felt like a magician had vanished mid-act, leaving only applause echoing through an empty stage. Those who worked with him noticed something else. Pierce was happiest when he wasn't being watched. Theater offered anonymity in a way television never could. On stage, every night was ephemeral, seen once, then gone. There were no reruns, no memes, no endless recycling of gestures. It was pure creation and immediate erasure. For a perfectionist, that was freedom. So while Hollywood speculated about his disappearance, Pierce simply returned to where he felt most alive. Still, the public wanted answers. Why would someone walk away from the kind of fame most actors chase forever? The question returned 2 decades later when news broke that Frasier was coming back. In 2023, Paramount Plus announced a revival starring Kelsey Grammer, promising a modern continuation of the beloved series. Nostalgia erupted. Fans imagined the Crane brothers reunited, older, wiser, still bickering over wine pairings and psychology. Yet when the first trailers dropped, something was missing. There was Frasier, but no Niles. Not a cameo, not even a voiceover. The absence was so stark it became its own headline. Where is David Hyde Pierce? Speculation spiraled immediately. Some assumed he had been snubbed. Others thought he must be ill or embroiled in behind-the-scenes conflict. But the truth, according to Kelsey Grammer, was simpler and stranger. Pierce had been invited. He had declined. No scheduling issue, no salary dispute. He just said no. Grammer summarized it cryptically. Everything is calm. Those 3 words only deepened the mystery. Calm compared to what? Was Pierce protecting his privacy, or was there a story Hollywood didn't want to tell? Online, fans refused to accept calm as an answer. Reddit threads dissected every interview, searching for hidden meaning. YouTube comment sections filled with theories. Perhaps Pierce felt Niles' story was complete. Or perhaps he had grown disenchanted with reboots that chased nostalgia instead of art. Some pointed to his long history of philanthropy and activism, suggesting he had simply moved his energy elsewhere. Others wondered if the intensity of television itself, its repetition, its scrutiny, had drained him beyond repair. Meanwhile, the new Frasier unfolded without him. Set once again in Boston, the reboot followed Frasier reconnecting with his adult son, Frederick, now a firefighter. Gone was the ensemble of eccentric Seattle friends. In their place, new characters trying to capture old magic. Yet the elephant in the room, or perhaps the empty chair at Cafe Nervosa, was Niles. The show addressed his absence obliquely, introducing a young character named David Crane, son of Niles and Daphne. A Harvard student, socially awkward and endearingly pompous, he was clearly designed as a spiritual echo of his father. But audiences weren't fooled. This isn't Frasier without Niles, one commenter wrote, a sentiment echoed thousands of times across forums. Replacing Pierce, fans argued, was like replacing Mozart with someone who merely owned a piano. The backlash revealed something deeper. People weren't just missing a character. They were mourning an actor who represented a certain standard of craft. David Hyde Pierce wasn't flashy. He didn't dominate tabloids or reinvent himself every few years. Instead, he built characters from the inside out, using intelligence and empathy rather than spectacle. In an entertainment world obsessed with exposure, his disappearance felt almost radical, a reminder that an artist can choose silence over endless noise. But beneath the admiration lies the question we began with. Why did he vanish from the spotlight? Fame alone doesn't explain retreat, neither does artistic fatigue. Somewhere between the lines of calm statements and polite declines, there's a story about control, identity, and the price of perfection. Because if anyone understood the dangers of letting performance consume life, it was David Hyde Pierce. As Frasier's Niles, he spent years portraying a man defined by discipline, measured, contained, forever resisting chaos. Off-screen, Pierce carried similar habits. Colleagues described him as meticulous, even private to a fault. He disliked gossip and rarely courted publicity. Interviews were thoughtful but guarded. He preferred discussing the mechanics of theater to sharing personal anecdotes. When reporters pressed about fame, he often deflected, saying he was grateful for the work. To the public, that humility seemed refreshing. To insiders, it hinted at something else, a deep unease with how fame distorts authenticity. And so, when the opportunity came to resurrect Niles decades later, perhaps Pierce recognized the trap. To reprise the character might mean undoing the very closure that had made him complete. Niles had found love, fatherhood, and peace, a rarity in sitcoms. Dragging him back for nostalgia's sake could cheapen that journey. In a way, saying no was the final act of respect, both to Niles and to himself. But if that's true, why keep the reasons hidden? Why the careful silence? That's where the mystery deepens, because every choice David Hyde Pierce has made since Frasier suggests intent, not accident. His return to Broadway wasn't a random escape. It was a deliberate retreat into art that values depth over exposure. The stage allowed him to vanish while still performing, to continue the craft without the glare of cameras. But there may be another, more personal reason behind his decision, one that has little to do with Hollywood politics and everything to do with self-preservation. When David Hyde Pierce stepped out of the Hollywood glare, it wasn't into obscurity, it was into purpose. Away from the cameras, he rediscovered something the industry rarely allows: control. For years, his life had been dictated by production schedules, network expectations, and the fickle appetites of audiences. On stage, however, he could breathe. Broadway doesn't demand eternal exposure. It demands excellence. And excellence was something Pierce had never abandoned. In the quiet streets of New York's theater district, he began to rebuild not a career, but a life. Critics who once associated him exclusively with Frasier soon began to whisper about his stunning performances in Curtin's Hello, Dolly. And Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike, each role was different, some comedic, some tragic, but all revealed a truth long hidden by sitcom fame. David Hyde Pierce was never just Niles Crane. He was an artist searching for honesty. But that honesty came with a cost. Television made him visible. Theater made him vulnerable. Unlike the safety of multiple takes and laugh tracks, stage work offered no barrier between actor and audience. Pierce has often described the experience as terrifying and liberating at once. Each night, he had to stand alone, no network, no editing, just himself, his craft, and the silence of an audience deciding whether to believe him. For someone who spent a decade playing a man obsessed with control, that kind of surrender was a form of healing. Slowly, he began to let go of the need to perfect every line, and instead focus on what drew him to acting in the first place: connection. Meanwhile, Hollywood continued to call. Offers for film roles, guest appearances, and revivals came and went, each met with polite refusals. The industry couldn't understand it. Why would anyone walk away from guaranteed fame? But to Pierce, the answer was simple: because he could. He'd already proven everything he needed to. Awards, recognition, critical acclaim, they no longer defined him. He once said in an interview that the greatest luxury success can buy is the freedom to say no. It was a statement few understood at the time, but it has aged into a quiet manifesto. While others chased longevity through reinvention, Pierce pursued invisibility as an art form. In doing so, he became one of the rarest figures in Hollywood, a man who left at the height of his relevance and never looked back. Still, his silence fed endless speculation. When the Frasier reboot aired without him, journalists pressed Kelsey Grammer for details. Grammer's response was diplomatic: Pierce, he said, wanted to move on to new things, to protect what the original show had accomplished. But those who knew Pierce well hinted that his reasoning ran deeper. The revival's very existence reminded him how easily art can become imitation. In one rare public comment, he mentioned that nostalgia only works when you leave something behind. Perhaps that was his final word on the matter. For him, Niles Crane wasn't a costume to be taken out of storage. He was a chapter already closed. Reopening it, Pierce feared, might undo the integrity of what had been built. His instincts weren't wrong. The new Frasier struggled to find its footing. Without the familiar rhythm between Frasier and Niles, the show felt oddly hollow, as though one half of a melody had been erased. Critics described it as charming but incomplete. Fans online were harsher, calling it Frasier in name only. It wasn't the fault of the new actors, many of whom delivered strong performances. It was the absence of that delicate balance, the sharp, wordless understanding between the Crane brothers that left a void no script could fill. For many, that void only deepened respect for Pierce's decision. His refusal to return suddenly seemed less like arrogance and more like artistic protection. In staying away, he preserved the soul of something millions still loved. Beyond performance, though, Pierce's withdrawal from the spotlight reflected something more personal: his values. Throughout his career, he has been quietly committed to causes that rarely make tabloid headlines. Long before it was common for celebrities to use their platforms for advocacy, Pierce was involved in Alzheimer's awareness campaigns, LGBTQ+ rights, and arts education. His activism was understated, sometimes anonymous. In the early 2000s, while the entertainment press speculated about his private life, Pierce chose to address rumors not with a press conference, but with honesty. When he publicly acknowledged his longtime partner, Brian Hargrove, it wasn't a headline grab. It was a moment of calm truth. The two married in 2008, just days before California's Proposition 8 temporarily banned same-sex marriage. In interviews since, Pierce has said little about his personal life, preferring that his marriage remain his own quiet revolution. For a man who spent years inhabiting characters defined by anxiety and restraint, living authentically, without spectacle, became its own form of peace. Yet even peace requires distance. Hollywood thrives on reinvention, on the constant hum of new projects, premieres, and appearances. For Pierce, who had always approached acting like a scholar rather than a salesman, that pace was unsustainable. Colleagues recall how he would obsess over the smallest detail in a scene, whether a pause was half a second too long or if a glance landed truthfully. That perfectionism, which made him brilliant, also made him weary. After years of sustaining that level of precision under relentless pressure, stepping back wasn't retreat, it was survival. By withdrawing, he wasn't turning his back on art. He was reclaiming it from an industry that commodifies everything, even passion. Still, the mystery endures because Pierce never offered a definitive explanation. He didn't announce a retirement or pen a tell-all memoir. Instead, he let absence speak. That silence invites projection. Fans see what they want to see. Some imagine a monk-like artist renouncing fame for purity. Others picture a weary actor who finally escaped the machinery of celebrity. The truth is likely somewhere in between. Like the characters he played, Pierce seems to thrive in contradiction. Public yet private, disciplined yet tender, detached yet deeply emotional. To understand why he vanished, perhaps we must accept that his disappearance was not a single event, but a long, deliberate fade, a slow turning away from the noise toward something quieter, truer, and yet his influence has never vanished. Watch any modern sitcom with a neurotic intellectual or an emotionally fragile genius, and you'll see echoes of Niles Crane. Actors who came after him cite his work as a masterclass in restraint, proof that subtlety can be as powerful as slapstick. Even today, clips of Frasier circulate online, introducing younger viewers to a style of comedy almost extinct, smart, literate, and perfectly timed. The irony, of course, is that Pierce's absence has only magnified his legacy. In disappearing, he became mythic, a ghost of television's golden age, who reminds audiences that greatness doesn't always seek attention. In rare interviews, Pierce hints at this paradox. When asked if he misses television, he smiles faintly and says, "I miss the people, not the process." It's a telling phrase. What he loved were the collaborations, the creative exchanges, not the machinery around them. For him, art was never about visibility. It was about integrity. That philosophy sets him apart in an era when many performers live half their lives online. Pierce, by contrast, seems perfectly content being forgotten, because in forgetting, he's free to begin again. There's also an element of legacy management at play. Pierce has always viewed storytelling as something sacred, and revisiting old work risks eroding its meaning. By declining to return to Frasier, he allowed the memory of Niles to remain frozen in time, forever articulate, awkward, and complete. It's a rare kind of wisdom, one most actors discover too late. In protecting the illusion, he ensured that Niles Crane could live eternally in reruns, untouched by the erosion of time. And perhaps that's the ultimate statement. To understand the power of art, one must also know when to let it go. The further Pierce moved from fame, the more his choices seemed guided by principle rather than ambition. On Broadway, he continued to earn critical praise, winning a Tony Award, directing plays that championed new voices, mentoring younger actors who sought depth over celebrity. Colleagues describe him as generous and fiercely intelligent, someone who approaches rehearsal like meditation. To those who ask whether he'll ever return to television, he offers only a gentle shrug. "Never say never," he once said, "but I've said yes enough." That quiet wit captures everything about him. Self-aware, gracious, and subtly defiant. If Disappearing was an act, it was his most disciplined performance yet. Hollywood is full of comebacks, reinventions, and confessions. Pierce chose something harder, the courage to stay gone. He didn't vanish because he failed. He vanished because he succeeded, because he reached the mountaintop and realized the view wasn't what he imagined. What he sought instead was meaning, the kind that can't be measured by ratings or applause. In the stillness of a theater, in the company of his husband, in the anonymity of ordinary life, he found it. And so when fans ask, why did David Hyde Pierce vanish from the spotlight? The answer may be simpler than any theory. He didn't vanish. He just stopped shining where others were looking. His light moved elsewhere, onto stages, into quiet activism, into a life defined by authenticity rather than exposure. In a culture that equates visibility with success, his disappearance feels almost rebellious. But perhaps that's the lesson he's been teaching all along, that true fulfillment doesn't come from being seen by everyone. It comes from being at peace with yourself. In the end, David Hyde Pierce's story isn't one of mystery or loss, it's one of evolution. The man who once played a character terrified of disorder learned to embrace it. The actor who mastered the art of control discovered the freedom of letting go. And the celebrity who disappeared from the screen never truly left. He simply stepped into a different kind of light, one not meant for cameras, but for life itself. His absence isn't a tragedy, it's a choice. And in that choice lies the quiet brilliance of a man who understood, better than most, that sometimes the greatest act of all is to exit gracefully, leaving behind a legacy that never fades.